Hello, everyone. I'm here with Jared today, and Jared is a colleague. He's a coach, a transformational coach. Hello, Jared.
Hey, Theodora, thanks for having me. I'm excited to get into this today. I think these are pretty important topics for the world right now because everyone's going through a lot of change. And the more change we go through, I think there creates a lot of stress for people at times. So I think having an understanding of what stress is, what we're moving through, how to work with it, I think that's really important for all the change that's happening in the world.
Where are you connecting from, Jared? Not that it makes any difference.
Yeah,
Not
so
everybody's.
so I'm all the way over here in the US. So Colorado
Okay.
specifically, I actually live right up against the Flatirons, the Front Range of the Rockies here in Denver, Colorado.
That's great. So today we're sharing a couple of tips for our students. It's exam period in Greece. I think it's an exam period in many other countries as well. So this information might be useful for teachers and their students. And Jared would like to share a couple of tips for us, the teachers. So Jared, what do you think we should bear in mind now that our students are really in this stressful period of their lives?
Yeah, great question. I think the first thing to recognize about stress is just understanding what stress is. Stress is a normal part of our human experience, but there's two types of stress. So there's distress and then there's eustress. Distress is the bad type of stress. It's the stress that comes from being distracted all the time, going from one thing to the next without awareness or consciousness. It's the stress that's created when we feel like we're not safe or when our survival is threatened. And it's associated with anxiety, spinning out, confusion, a lack of clarity. The other type of stress is eustress, E-U, then the word stress, and that's good stress. That's the stress that every human being actually needs. It's that healthy, challenging stress. So maybe you're doing a task that you've never performed before, but it's exciting you. You're learning something new. It's not overbearing and it's not overwhelming, but it is challenging you and pushing your limits. That's the type of stress that is a good stress, and we can handle it. It's not a stress that feels too much, or we feel burnt out, or we feel like we can't continue to move forward. So first off, I think it's just important to have those two distinctions of stress. There's distress and then there's the eustress.
Yeah, that's a really important distinction. And thank you for sharing this. So what do we do when our students are stressed? Are there any coping skills that you can share? Any coping tricks?
Absolutely. I think before I get into the actual tricks to calm down and to deal with stress, I think it's important to recognize that when you get stressed out, if you continue to have bad and distress, it's eventually going to lead to burnout. And when I say what I mean, it's going to eventually lead to burnout is you eventually will be exhausted, you'll fall apart, and there's signs of burnout. And a lot of individuals in the modern world, with all the change that's happening, there's a lot of change that's happening in the political structures. There's a lot of change that's happening in the financial system, a lot of change that's happening in the schools right now. So, we're post-pandemic only by 2 years. So a lot of individuals are stressed out and they may not even be aware of how stressed out they are because they're still caught up in a fight or flight mode. In that fight or flight mode, that's that survival mode where we get defensive, we're on the edge. So it's important, I think, just number one, to recognize where we are along the stress continuum. So there's a stress continuum, and so I'm going to walk us through that, I think, first, just so we can identify where you are in terms of a stress response and how you're managing and coping with that stress response.
What I always tell my students is that even 2 minutes of stress might flood our system with cortisol. And when our system floods with cortisol, then our IQ lowers by 50%. And that's when we make bad decisions, we do stupid things, we do silly things.
Yeah.
And we say, afterwards, we say, how did I say that? How did I do that?
Right.
It's because of cortisol in the system. So they always remember that. They say, no, I don't want to lower my IQ now. Yeah.
That's great. Yeah. Yeah. Our body is actually only designed to have one significant stressful moment and release of cortisol for 20 to 30 minutes every 48 to 72 hours. So we're only supposed to have one significant stress response once every 3 days. But most, I'd say like a majority of people in the modern world, especially in the education system, whether it's in college or high school, because they're most of the time people are living in it. They're always in that stress-filled response.
So the system never flushes out this cortisol.
Exactly.
They live on survival mode.
Yes.
On end. Yeah.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Some people have been there their entire life and they don't even know what it's like to be out of that.
They've never experienced being out of it.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Because obviously nobody has taught them what they're going through and how they can cope and how to deal with it.
Yes.
So any tricks, any techniques you'd like to share?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think the first one is, and I'll go back to identifying. Before I get into sharing the tricks, I actually want to get into this because I think this is really valuable to recognize. This is, in America, we have Herbert Freudenberger and Gail North. They're pretty popular psychologists, and they made a really great list of what it means to be stressed out and how to identify where you're at along the stress continuum here. So when they look at burnout is when stress is overwhelming, there's more cortisol flooding the system, and we get exhausted, kind of like the girl in the image right here. And one of the first things that I see is there's a compulsion to prove oneself. So I need to demonstrate my worth and my value excessively. That's really where actual burnout and the stress response starts. Okay, I want to impress my coworkers, I want to impress my colleagues, I want to impress my classmates. That's the first, that's the start of stress. Then from there, you get into this mode where you're working hard and you don't even know how to switch off. I'm sure students and even teachers can relate to this, where during exam season, you're thinking about everything still, and you're sleeping at night. You're trying to sleep at night, and you're thinking about all the papers you got to grade. You're thinking about feedback you're giving to students. I'm sure you've had this experience many times as well too, Theodora. Yeah. So that right there is another sign. Okay, you're headed towards burnout. Third one then is neglecting of basic needs. So maybe you're not eating enough. Maybe you're not maybe there's not a lot of social interaction. That's the third degree of intensity. So if you start noticing that there's a lack of social interaction, there's not health, maybe there's a lack of eating, all of that is contributing to the burnout. Fourth one here is displacement of problems. And this is a big one that I see. Problems are actually dismissed. So for instance, maybe you start getting short with your spouse, or maybe you start getting short with your students, or maybe you start getting short with your clients. So you start projecting your problems onto other people. Then the fifth one is a revision of values. So the very core values that you may have had, you start forgetting about them. Maybe your friends or family are dismissed. You don't actually have any hobbies anymore. That goes out the window. You're getting much closer to burnout. Sixth one is you finally start to deny the actual problems. So you might see yourself as people start saying, man, this person's intolerant. You perceive collaborators as stupid or aggressive. You become cynical. problems are viewed by not your inner energy state being the cause, but other people being the cause. So there's like that other projection. Everyone else is wrong but me.
Yes. So you fall into that victim state, and
yes, exactly.
And it's gonna take long until you realize what's going on there.
You nailed it. That's exactly it. That's exactly it. So that's another big thing. You start falling into that victim state. You perceive everyone as stupid. You become cynical. But we're still not at the worst. So we're at step 7 now. Step 7 is you just withdraw from social life entirely. It's non-existent. You don't really have that many social contacts. There might be some weird behavioral changes that you notice. Your family might comment on them. Hey, you're doing things you've never done before. This is weird or odd around you. The 8th one is depersonalization. So you stop seeing value in yourself, but you also stop seeing value in others. And there's a sense of inner emptiness. The 9th one here is actually depression. So the future starts to feel bleak. You view all your problems being caused by work. Maybe you're in that victim mentality. You don't think it's worth maybe going forward. Then finally, you actually have burnout syndrome, which is you can't even think enough. Like you're on the verge of mental collapse. You can't even, you don't even know what to think about next. And that's when you actually need some medical assistance, and the mental space and bandwidth that's required for your day's activities aren't even there. So that's really the intensity from the top to the bottom from a clinical setting of burnout.
And this culminates when students get closer to the exam.
I would say
so it might start.
Yeah, I mean, it can start midway through the semester or the quarter or the trimester, whatever. All education systems are different, but I mean, I'll see it. A student might start off. I mean, I'm just even reflecting on some of my own experiences through the education system. They might start off really excited and looking forward to school, and they're like, "Oh, I want to get into it," and then they get like halfway there, and they're struggling still. And then, maybe they're 75% through the semester or the quarter, but they're feeling exhausted, they're tired, they're drinking multiple cups of coffee throughout the day just to stay awake. They're low on mental bandwidth, so they're having trouble even thinking. And that's how you know when a person's starting to reach burnout. I'd be curious to hear, Theodora, just in your experience with teaching and students, do you ever see this come up a lot for them?
Yeah, my students are trained to cope with that because I train them. So they learn how to cope with that. We don't just wait for the exam period to come and start coping with these stress levels. But I see it with other students, and my students experience it with their friends, and they try to support them. They don't really know how, because that takes some kind of training. And my students get stressed when their friends get stressed. They try to support them, but it's not always successful. Yeah.
I love that. I think that's a really setting up a system so you don't even have the problem in the first place. That's resilience. Like that's where we want everyone to be, at a point where they don't even experience any or very few of those signs or symptoms. We did a workshop for the National Bank of Canada a couple of weeks ago, and I think it was like 65% of the entire organization, when we did the assessment, was at the point on step 8. 65% of this entire 25,000 employee organization was at step 8. So it's really important to be aware of, how it's it's really important to be aware of the systems and procedures and tips that can keep you from releasing that cortisol on a daily basis to the point where it leads to burnout.
And I think the background of what cortisol is and how the brain works helps the students a lot to realize that they need learn to manage their stress levels, not to wait until something bad happens and then act reactively. They need to act proactively because they know the background.
Absolutely.
How
And
the
this,
brain works.
I'd agree 100%. And I'd also add, know what stresses your body out. Like know what foods stress your body, know what liquids you're taking in stress your body, know what your sleep cycles are.
Yeah, the sleep patterns also play an important role.
Yeah, high performers, they know what to put in their body and what not to put in their body. They know when to sleep, when not to sleep. You know, I take probably a cold bath, sometimes even twice a day throughout the week, just to reset the nervous system, to calm everything down. Majority of my diet is smoothies. It's not hard, solid foods because it takes a lot of energy to digest hard, solid food, which adds to stress to the body. So the less stress that you can bring to the body, the better, the more high performing you'll be.
Yeah, that definitely really helpful. Yeah. Any other tricks you'd like to share?
Yeah, that's great. I can finally answer your question now. So there's a lot of different tricks. There's breath work, you know, there's yoga, there's all these different types of things, which I'm sure you've probably taught. But one of the ones that I do, it's literally called gut heart breathing. And so you actually place, and I did this with the National Bank of Canada as well. You take your right hand, you place it over your stomach. And a lot of us don't breathe from our belly anymore. Like if you look at a baby, if you notice when they first come into the world, they always breathe from their belly. But then as stress increases, as we go,
they know how to breathe.
Exactly. They know how to breathe very properly. Yep. But then as we go throughout life, you see that breathing get shallow in the belly gets pulled in and it comes up to the chest, and we start breathing just from the chest. We get, I'd say about 65% of the oxygen into our system from the belly. And the remaining 45 or 35% comes from the chest. So most human beings aren't actually getting enough oxygen in the way that they're breathing. So one of the things that I always first do with individuals who have never been taught how to breathe, or maybe they lost touch with their baby breathing days, you put one hand over the stomach, one hand over the chest and the heart, and you breathe in through the nose on a 3 count, and then out through the mouth on a 6 count. And what this does is it grounds your breathing back into the gut. So then you breathe in from the gut into the chest and then out through the mouth. So it really looks like it's pretty simple, but if you do this, you'll notice your system will start to calm down. So it looks like this.
Exactly.
And I'll walk a group through that, and we'll do about 12 cycles of that. And even if you just do 12 cycles of that before you start an activity, you'll notice your body's way more calm, you're way more relaxed, and you come from a very, very different inner space. So it's really important to be aware of how the body, how the body likes to breathe. And what that actually does, we won't get into too fancy terms here, but that balances the nervous system. You know, in the nervous system, we have the parasympathetic and the sympathetic. Sympathetic is fight or flight. That's that, okay, I'm on alert, high alert. Parasympathetic is calming down. It's at the end of our day. And a lot of individuals are living too much in the sympathetic and not enough in the parasympathetic. That breathing exercise balances even just 12 cycles of that. That takes about 5 minutes. It balances the parasympathetic and the sympathetic nervous system, so we can be calm and grounded and come to our activities with a degree of awareness and alertness, while at the same time be relaxed in the body. That's how we want to be. That's our natural state. I'm aware, I'm alert, I'm awake, see everything around me, and I'm relaxed in the body. That's a high performing, resilient state.
Yeah, that's great. Really useful. Deep breathing removes brain fog really quickly and flushes out cortisol from our system really, really quickly. So I think this is the most powerful technique that anybody should use. I usually, I train my students how to do that by having them put a straw in their mouth. So whenever they breathe out, they exhale, they do it through the straw so that they learn to do it like with a flow, not quickly. Because
That's
breathing
great.
out should be longer. If you want to relax really quickly, breathing out, exhaling should be longer than breathing in. And we do it without a pause. We don't do box breathing for this. When we want to relax, we do cycle breathing, breathing in and out, but breathing out should be longer.
Yes, beautiful.
So really similar to what you're doing and what you're teaching.
That's great. That's great. Yeah, I love that. It's so needed.
And lately we've started doing the heart breathing, which is really, really powerful.
Yeah.
So maybe in another video we could share that kind of breathing as well. So let's keep it simple right now so that everybody can use it in their classrooms. And we'd like to get some feedback from my colleagues, and maybe your colleagues might be watching this podcast.
Yeah, I love that. I love that. I think that's a great idea. Yeah, it's really needed in the world. I think all the change and shift that's happening, there's so many changes that are happening in the family, in the culture, in our society, all around the world, that these techniques are going to become more and more important. And health and wellness is on the rise.
Definitely.
So this is really important work for individuals to understand and feel really calm and relaxed.
And I mean, I'm really committed to doing that, because imagine if people know from the age of 10 or 15 how to regulate their nervous system. That's going to be awesome when they grow up and they're adults, and whatever their work environment is, they're going to be able to cope and live in a balanced way instead of
I love
really
that.
high stress levels.
Most work problems all come down to people don't know how to regulate. They don't know how to regulate their nervous system. And so then they get out of control and then they freak out on other people, and it creates workplace issues. So I think if we can teach these to students and the younger generation, it will prepare and give them a really great foundation for moving forward in their life and their work in a healthy way.
Really, really useful information. And thank you, Jared, for being here with me today. Jared Bull, who is a transformational coach, and he has connected with us from the USA, from Colorado, from Denver, right? Denver?
Yeah. Theodora, thanks so much for having me. I appreciate it. And I love the work that you're doing over there in Greece with teachers. And I love the international work that's starting to come out as well, too. And the work is definitely needed in the world. I always say that whether you consider yourself a coach, a healer, or a transformational presence, this work is so needed in the world. So I appreciate you having me on.
Yeah. Thank you, Jared.